and in particular in the humanitarian space as against pure development and partnership. In the humanitarian space, which ultimately is about saving life from either natural disaster or man-made disaster, such as conflict, and protecting vulnerable people, including trying to prevent women's bodies being used as weapons of war. Children and elderly and the chronically ill finding themselves marginalised and vulnerable, either in terms of natural disasters or man-made conflict. The real crunch is that whatever the numbers are, and they move a little bit about, but broadly speaking, about 150 million people in the world tonight need their lives saving.
You mentioned the impact of climate change, and what are your thoughts on that in terms of key natural resources such as food or water or land? If you could explain a bit about that, please.
Yeah, I think there was pressure on, in fact, there's been pressure on food and water and land for a long time as the population of the world's grown so dramatically. And so 7 billion gusting 9 billion puts a lot of demand, particularly when many of the communities, and it's not just an increase in numbers, people are living longer, more, but also it's an issue of increased aspirations. And the challenge that climate change poses to that is that we either end up perhaps with reduced yields. For example, if you have 1 degree overnight, 1 degree centigrade overnight rise in temperature, that knocks 10% off rice yields. We've seen the impact of extreme droughts in wheat harvests or extreme wet periods, both of which we saw in 2010. And at the same time, we've always talked about the management of water being one of the great strengths. We've avoided water wars, etc. I'm not sure that as the pressure grows, unless we improve our management of water, we're going to be able to retain that state of affairs, and we will need to work harder in those areas. The real difficulty is that there are a number of countries around the world which are particularly vulnerable, have resource challenges, food shortages, water shortages, but they also have health problems, they've got demographic issues, parts of the world where we've seen conflict in the past, either between states or more often within states, frequently because the governments haven't got the capacity and the resilience to deal with the challenges that their societies face. And that really acts as a sort of stress multiplier. Well, although climate change is a global problem, the physical effects have mainly been felt in those same countries. So it's a bit like pouring a bucket of petrol on a smouldering fire. It's inflaming the situation, and it's acting really as a threat multiplier, which is increasing the risks of instability, not just in those areas, but further afield, depending on whether people are moving or whether people are trapped because they can't move. And therefore, in order to find a livelihood or an income, they're susceptible to organised crime, or even in some instances, extremist violence, extremist organisations like Boko Haram, AQ, Al-Shabaab and others.
Quick supplementary, if I may, which is, Susie just touched on the role of the aerospace and defence industry. Of course, one of its gifts is that it does act as a systems integrator. And just as we've been talking about the sort of the need for an overview from a sort of procurement perspective for these challenges, the great gift of aerospace and defence is that it can stitch together solutions in this systems integration role. Do you see that as a strength that has not yet been exploited in tackling global challenges?
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think, a number of my American colleagues have talked about the need to have the equivalent of a space program to tackle some of these challenges. And that's the point you make about the integration piece and bringing together all the strands in a manner that it can be effective and achieve the objective we're setting out to do, which is, as I said, in my mind, is to reduce the risks that these challenges pose to society. For some of it, the aerospace sector, yeah. For some other sectors, or in some cases, it's governments. In some cases, it may be a major global NGO or something like that. I mean, I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all, but undoubtedly, a systems integrator such as the aerospace sector is well positioned. And actually, some of the companies have had huge experience. Indeed, they were involved in the space program in the past.
Nick, here we all are in lockdown, coping with this coronavirus pandemic. And many people around the world are wondering what they can do to help now, but also thinking, what will the world look like once we get through to the other side? And then we have to face, again, all those huge global challenges, climate change, poverty, migration, and indeed widespread conflict. You've just making your own contribution to that effort, publishing the document, A Call to Action. Now that focuses on the aerospace and defense industry. Now, given that its business is developing, manufacturing and selling weapon systems, I'd like you to be able to explain to me what role you see the aerospace and defense sector playing as we try to tackle those huge global challenges.
Well, John, as you know, we are storytellers. I'm a storyteller, but I also have a background in journalism. I was for many years a senior editor at Jane's Defence Weekly, which a number of people will know is a sort of leading military affairs journal. And in that time, I carried out a big I knew the industry, the aerospace and defence industry very well, but I carried out a very big audit of its capabilities right towards the end of my time there. So this was in about 2006-07. And I spotted a bunch of patterns, across these big 9 prime contractors that sit at the top of the supply chain in the Western world. We know many of their names. There's Boeing and Lockheed Martin and BAE Systems. But what I spotted was that, not only is their business much the same, they all make these platforms, ships, guns, tanks, weapon systems, as you say. But below a kind of waterline that you don't commonly see, there is this huge array of capability, science and technology, quite well developed technology in some cases, that rarely gets deployed. It's because governments do the commissioning of these weapon systems that they typically build. So my thought was, at this time, what if we could find a mechanism to deploy a lot of this science and technology that doesn't get taken up, but a lot of it is very actionable on global challenges, such as climate change, such as food and water security, such as the environment, even down to things like resilient and overcrowded cities. And it got me to wondering, why are these technologies, these capabilities, not deployed? And from that, I really got to where I am today, which was waking up a few weeks ago, in the midst of this coronavirus crisis, thinking, what can I do? What can we do to build a better world after we come out of virus? And my thought to that was, well, let's get this sector, this business industry sector, the aerospace and defense community, to liberate that pool of technical knowledge and know-how against global challenges.
Has some very unique capabilities. They have technology, in some cases developed for weapon systems that could be applied to other applications and we've seen this historically. A lot of first-time technology has been developed in the aerospace and defense sector. Do you believe there is a role for aerospace and defense companies that they could play a kind of a leading role in helping address some of these global challenges based on the technology they have, but also on the capabilities that they bring to the table with their systems of systems kind of approach to solving very big and complex problems?
Yeah, let's, in a way I like to say this with aerospace companies and many other types of companies, but focusing on aerospace companies, In a lot of ways, they are uniquely positioned with capabilities that make the impossible real for their customers every day. The technology talent, the innovation talent that these companies have is truly unbelievable. And they're always making the impossible real. And so given the opportunity to focus on global challenges, I'm sure these companies, this industry would be successful. To me, the key is really in some ways, at the public sector to start investing more in addressing global challenges and threats. As we've seen with the pandemic, that threat's been there for a long time. But investing in that direction, unleashing the capabilities of the A&D companies and make the impossible real. And I think that industry can tackle just about any challenge that's out there. If you can go to the moon and back multiple times, you can do this. And even some of the capabilities that people are focused on regarding tracking, regarding folks that have been infected by coronavirus, doing tracking, addressing threats. I think some of these companies could do that today. So it's really about this, and you can see this theme. It's really about this public-private partnership. You could even throw in universities into this mix. Universities are investing a lot in global challenges, one to attract students and one to solve problems. And that global challenges, people want to be a part of that. People want to strive forward and putting more time and effort into developing business models that connect the dots to that pathway. I think we'll see more and more of that come.
But I'm just thinking that once the world needs to get back working again after the virus has gone away, hopefully, the big companies will want to get their profits going again, to get back into the work that they know they can do, the money they can make. Likewise, governments will want to do the same thing, get the workforces back and get the money coming back into the national coffers. So do you think people are going to listen? Have you had people in the aerospace and defense sector listening to this and saying, yeah, that's interesting? And we would do this, and if so, why they might do that or how they might do it. And likewise, what about the government? Are they interested in making this big shift, which seems to serve everybody so much better than just building, weapons that could be used obviously against humankind?
Well, we started a conversation about this about 10 years ago. And I think the first thing to say is that, this is not, on my part, a swords into plowshares movement. As laudable as that might be, no more conflict. That is a pipe dream that at the moment just wouldn't fly. I think what most reasonable people would say is that we expect countries to build and deploy things that are sustainable for their defense. They need, we should buy enough systems, capability, defensive systems to protect ourselves as nation states. Where sometimes that can get out of control is in regions of conflict, as you would know, John, only too well, where, for example, you have tinderbox regions that cannot support big influxes of weapon systems because they can be destabilizing. I think it's very healthy for us to look at other sources, additional sources of revenue to make defense just that, sustainable defense. And, if you look at that capability that we've been talking about, this reserve of science and technology below the waterline of what is commonly built and deployed by defense companies, a lot of that technology can go, as we've said, towards solving some of the sources of conflict. For example, it is not beyond the bounds of capability within these companies, aerospace and defense companies, to build and deploy large hospitals for humanitarian causes, as we have seen in London in the last, several weeks. But beyond that, they are developing, some of them are developing technologies that might even go into things like desalination plants. Well, if you can get a desalination plant into a tinderbox zone of conflict, what you're doing is you're decreasing the chances of conflict erupting in the first place, because pressures on natural resources are one of the key factors that spark off conflict. So I think there are many things that these companies can do that don't take away their business base. They can actually add to them. There are multiple surveys that show that the global demand for systems and technologies in the global challenges marketplace, think clean tech, for example, is many, many times greater and bigger than the actual defense market itself. So it is a worthy market for these companies to see as adjacent to their business, but in time move more into that adjacent market, make it more core and central to what you do than they would otherwise look on them at the moment. And in so doing, make money, do good and do well out of this. Is there scope, in your opinion, for aerospace and defense sector involvement in combating global challenges?
Yeah, I think certainly they have the capability, the resources, the talent, and also the technologies needed to really combat and deal with some of the global challenges that we currently have. And if you look at some of the things that we're used to using every day now, like GPS or the internet or chips, those things were developed by the military originally for military purposes and then repurposed for other sort of things. I think the defense and aerospace industry can take a more active role in directly developing things for the global challenges.
So what sort of, you've talked a little bit about some of those technologies that have migrated from aerospace and defense through into our world now. And of course, they're everywhere, as you've said. But what sort of technologies now do you think that are sort of currently going on within the aerospace and defense community could migrate to combating global challenges?
Well, like I mentioned about compact fusion, that's a great example of that's something currently being developed at the Skunk Works, and that can really help with global energy challenges. There's still almost 1 billion people in the world without electricity today. It's hard for me to imagine, and I'm sure for most people to imagine not having electricity. There's also technologies associated with artificial intelligence. There's, I think that if you look at the application space of things like tackling global health, tackling new ways of doing energy storage for renewables, tackling ways of capturing carbon, CO, all those areas really is somewhere that the defense and aerospace industry have technologies that can help. But also, maybe more importantly is the skill set and the infrastructure needed to actually tackle these problems at scale. You know, and I think that's something that this sector is really good at, is tackling large problems that are really system level problems, and bringing together the right technologies, the right people, the right teams to be able to really address something that is very complex and very hard for a small organization to really deal with appropriately. You know, the aerospace industry is really good at complex system engineering, and I think that's some of the things that it's going to take. You know, in addition to new technologies, just, you know, how do we get the infrastructure in place? How do we scale it? And that's something that the industry is very capable of doing.
There is one more reason to do this, I think, which is if you were to go to most aerospace and defense companies in the Western world, they would say that they are suffering from a recruitment challenge. You know, Millennials and Generationz workforce, you know, graduates and apprentices are not moving into aerospace and defense in the way that, you know, baby boomers like me once did. Why is that? Well, the jury is kind of out, but I think one of the reasons is that, you know, defense is really quite opaque. You don't know what you're getting into when you look on it as a career opportunity. On the other hand, you know, adjacent sectors like the tech sector in Silicon Valley and elsewhere, you know, that's actually really very transparent. And I think a lot of Generation Z types with engineering degrees, particularly in software sciences, would see that as a natural place to go and make a career in, rather than in aerospace and defense. Well, what better way to give that generation a sense of purpose than to go, actually, you're not just going to defend your nation, you're going to go and defend the planet. And I think that is very much in time and in tune with, you know, how we all feel right now. After the virus, we want to build a better world. And I can't think of a better way of doing it than that.
Debbie, you know, the world faces multiple challenges today. We look at issues like clean water and sanitation, affordable energy, mass migration, climate change. We have a health crisis going on right now with the coronavirus. When you look at the aerospace and defense sector, where you've spent your entire career, do you see a role that that particular sector could play in helping address some of these global challenges that may be a little different than how they've traditionally been involved, particularly given their unique technology capabilities, their development capabilities, their systems kind of thinking and being able to solve complex problems? Do you think there's a role for aerospace and defense companies?
I do think that there could be a role for aerospace and defense industry in addressing these global challenges. In some ways, the industry inroads into helping address the challenges with things like clean fuel alternatives, lowering emissions, helping address climate change, but there's ever so much more to be done. The A&D industry is uniquely positioned to lead the way in significant change and improvements in some of the global challenges we face today. As you pointed out, they're used to dealing with complex systems and challenges, and they have incredible innovative knowledge and experience and capabilities to bring to bear to help in areas probably that we haven't even yet imagined. But we're going to have to keep pressure on and highlight the benefits of and positive outcomes that happen when we all work together towards a common purpose. We can't revert back to the way things have always been. There has to be what you've heard talked about all over, the new normal. And that new normal has got to include us thinking and acting differently. Includes how we collaborate and partner to accomplish things. We've seen wonderful things that can happen. You mentioned a number of them, and they can happen extremely quickly with turnarounds that before would have seemed unimaginable. No, that can't be done, and we certainly can't do it that quickly. But these positive transformations can arise from chaos and horrible situations. It requires organizations and people who are at the heart of organizations to be agile and adapt quickly to challenges with amazing responses. The examples you mentioned and other examples that are cropping up every single day. It requires leaders, courageous leaders from all walks of life who won't settle for, well, that's the way we've always done it here, and we tried that, but it didn't work. They won't settle for that, and they want to create change for the good of many and the good of this planet, the one planet that we all live on before. And the A&D sector has always been at the cutting edge of developing technology and products that have broad-based capability. It's just seeing what that applicability might be. We have to think differently. We have to act. So, I mean, look at what Elon Musk, for example, has accomplished with SpaceX. A few years ago, one dreamed that it would be possible to launch these capsules into space and then have the first stage land back on a moving platform on the ocean and be reused. No one dreamed that that was possible. Clearly he dreamed it was possible. And look how we feel about it now. Now we feel like, well, of course it's doable because we've seen someone do it. Right. He took risks and he was comfortable with the uncertainty of innovation. He wanted to do something, he had a purpose. He found a way to. I think we need a lot more of that type of thinking and action, and this brave leadership that's willing to deal with innovation and uncertainty to break through to the applications that can help the globe.
Do you get a sense that here we are wrestling with pandemic? You know, it's a huge seismic challenge to us all. Do you get a sense that coming out of this, there'll be an appetite for new ideas, change, you know, new opportunities? I mean, we've touched on that already, but sort of almost like a new mood to try and create this better world that, you know, we've been talking about.
Yeah, so I really think so, and I'm always the optimist, and I hope so. Because we certainly can make things better for each other. And that's kind of the function of the nonprofit that we have. Is it's called the Unlab, and it stands for unlimited abundance. And we really believe in that abundance truly is unlimited. And I think that this pause in society will help us reconsider what it really means to have abundance, and maybe work a bit more together on creating that abundance for everybody. That's what I'm hoping.